Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of my attempt to celebrate Victober, where I sit here and drink Dr. Pepper and get amped about Victorian literature. So last time, in part 1, I was gushing about 5 of my favorite authors from the Victorian period. Today is going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be a lot shadier, so I am going to be doing 5 Victorian classics that I did not enjoy, starting off with The Professor by Charlotte Bronte. This is Charlotte's first novel. She failed to find a publisher for this book during her lifetime, and it was only released after her death, and it's pretty understandable why no one wanted to put out this book. It is pretty bad. The problem with this book is that it is just so painfully boring. I mean, it is a slim book, only around 200 pages, and yet it is still so dry and difficult to get through. I only read this book a few months ago and I already completely forget the main character's name. I can't remember anything about him for the life of me. He does not feel like a real fully fleshed out person. So a lot of this book is based off of Charlotte's own life experience. She moved to Belgium and became a teacher, so that is also what this no-name man does as well. But even though I'm a teacher myself, I didn't really find a lot of that material very engaging. There's also like the first 50 pages of this book are like a waste of time, where he's becoming a businessman and then he just leaves and it becomes this whole other novel. There's sort of a love story going on, but again, there is no passion there. I thought it would be interesting to read because a lot of this material was later reworked into what would become Villette, which is a much superior novel, but I honestly didn't really come up with a lot of interesting comparisons. It wasn't as rewarding as I was expecting it to be, so please just do yourself a favor and skip this one and just go straight to Villette. Up next is the vampire classic Dracula by Bram Stoker, and the reason that book is on this list is because I ended up losing my copy of this book before finishing. I still had like 100 pages to go, and I just didn't care. Like, I didn't try to find it, and I didn't find a new one so that I could finish this book. It really didn't matter. I just wanted to be done with it. So that means that it wasn't a very engaging read for me, even though I did read it when I was considerably younger. But still, this is the kind of story that works better in a movie, not a long-winded novel that is told through a lot of boring letters. So just didn't have a lot of excitement. It wasn't scary at all. I like the guy who is like into capturing the flies in his room or whatever, but really I would say skip this one and watch the hilarious and terrible Keanu Reeves, Gary Oldman adaptation instead. Another creepy Victorian tale that didn't go so well for me was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. I was pretty familiar with the plot of the story going in. I mean, I've seen the Arthur episode. I think most modern readers know exactly what the twist in this book is, and I think that was kind of the most fun of the story, is revealing that twist and what's going on. So knowing the plot ahead of time definitely takes a lot out of this story. As well, I feel like because it's a Victorian novel, it's very restricted in what Stevenson can describe, so it would be more engaging if we could see what Mr. Hyde was up to. If this book had been more scandalous, it would have been a lot more fun. Also, most of the plot is spent trying to figure out what's going on and not necessarily getting into the psychological implications until the very end of the story. So it was kind of a letdown. Most of the other stories in this collection are pretty weak as well. Aside from one exception, The Bottle Imp was quite great. It's about people trying to play this sick game of hot potato with this cursed bottle. I liked that one, but everything else wasn't very scary, wasn't very engaging. There's an unfinished novel in here called Weir of Hermiston that was so horrible. I could not wait for Stevenson to give up on this project and stop writing, so I didn't have to read it anymore. It had a promising beginning where this guy is protesting capital punishment, which was a radical move at the time, especially because his father was a judge who was handing out a lot of these death sentences. So it had this good first chapter, and then it just totally unraveled from there and fell apart, and I cannot tell you a single thing that happened past that point because it was just so boring. I forgot it instantly. So yeah, didn't love this one. The next book on the list is The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. This book is a letdown because it has such a great premise. I mean, you have this character that has turned invisible, You could get into so much mischief and adventures. Like, he could be the biggest troll ever. This book could have been really funny, and it's not. H.G. Wells took it in a pretty different direction. So I was just hoping that this was going to be fun, and it wasn't. This is another example of a short book that feels like a much longer one. It's only like 150 pages, and I struggled to finish this when I was reading it at the time. So even though there's juicy stuff like murder and revenge, there was just not a lot of fun going on in this book, and I just wished that it was something different than what it turned out being. I feel pretty bad about including the last book on this list because I know it is beloved by many people, and that is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And now I have read this quite a few years ago, so part of me is telling myself, like, you're wrong. You just didn't like this book, but it's actually good, and if you'd go back and reread it now, you'd see the errors in your ways. But I haven't done so yet, and still, in my mind, this is just kind of a not so great book. There's no denying that this book has a very intriguing premise where you have this blank slate of a human being who continues to age without losing any of their youthful good looks, but continues to gain more experience and just becomes more and more corrupt, even though that doesn't show on the surface. This book gives you a lot to think about afterwards, but just the act of reading it isn't really all that enjoyable. I did not care much for Lord Henry, who Oscar Wilde uses as a vehicle to deploy his witty lines, so Lord Henry just never seemed to shut up. Oscar Wilde is better known as a playwright, so I was hoping that the story was going to be more dramatic and exciting and tense, but there really wasn't a lot of forward momentum for this plot. It just kind of dragged along. You kind of knew the direction it was going in, but it didn't ever seem very urgent. And for a story about a guy who's losing his soul and becoming so depraved and corrupt, it wasn't that engaging to read about. He gets in this sordid love affair that could have been so engrossing, and it just kind of fell flat for me, which is a disappointment. And I think I really would prefer Oscar Wilde's plays because I also didn't much care for the long descriptive passages in this novel as well. I would have preferred if he was keeping it flowing more with the dialogue and action. Again, I haven't read this book for a long time, so I am open to the idea that I have misjudged this book and I'm wrong, and it actually is very gripping and engrossing. But as I remember it, it was just kind of a tedious read, even though I did enjoy the themes that Oscar Wilde explores, and I did enjoy thinking about it afterwards. So if you think that I am totally off base about this book and need to reread it sometime soon, please let me know because I will seriously consider it. So that's it for my list. Feel free to keep the slander going in the comments and let me know if there are any Victorian classics that you just aren't into. Thank you for watching, and see you again in part 3, where I talk about 5 Victorian authors that I haven't read yet, but am most excited to try out sometime soon. Bye!